Hello and welcome to Beyond the Broom Cupboard, an entertaining look at the serious business of children's television. Welcome, this is a new podcast from me, Corin, and I'm also a new podcaster. I wanted to make this podcast to meet some of the passionate people who make amazing television aimed at children. And just because it's TV aimed at kids doesn't mean this isn't something made with just as much passion or thought or craft or TV for adults. In many cases, it's much more considered and creative. I have two kids, one 7, one 12, and I also loved kids' TV myself when I was growing up. And as an adult, I've had the pleasure of working with some of the people who've brought these worlds to life, which is the reason I've started this podcast, to ask about their experiences and their processes. As my first guest, I was absolutely thrilled to be able to talk to Sophie Aldred. Sophie's probably best known as Ace, a companion to Sylvester McCoy's Doctor Who between 1987 and 1989. But children's television has been the absolute backbone of her career, as you'll hear, and she was really determined to make it that way from an early age. She's worked in live-action programs such as Corners, Melvin and Maureen and Words and Pictures, as well as adding her voice to a huge amount of animated characters, big names such as Dennis the Menace and Tree Foo Tom. Sophie was really generous with her time, and it was great to speak to her, and very patient with the fact I'm a newbie. So here we go, Sophie Aldred. Hello, Sophie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Well, it's really great to talk to you because you've had a very long career in, well, lots of things, but woven through that is a lot of children's television. And I think your career is really interesting because you've done a lot of live action stuff and you've done a lot of animated stuff as well. So you've seen quite a spectrum of different ways of making kids' TV. But first of all, what were your experiences of watching TV when you were younger? What did you watch? Where did you watch it? What do you remember?
Well, I remember in our living room on our old black and white telly with the aerial that you had to keep moving around sometimes because it would go fuzzy. It's funny to think about it now, isn't it? I used to watch with Mother. I remember Andy Pandy. Andy Pandy, I always thought he was a bit creepy, the Andy Pandy.
And Andy Pandy was a sort of clown, wasn't he? He was a marionette clown.
Yeah, who always smiled, of course, because he was a marionette. His legs would go sort of, funny. I wasn't too keen on that, really. But the Wooden Tops now, there's a programme. Bill and Ben, Flower Pot Men, and Spotty Dog. And Bill and Ben were these... I suppose, well, they lived in the garden and they were made of flower pots. The marionettes were really, really great because they were Bill and Ben, Flower Pot Men. And there was little, it was probably made by somebody who was under the influence of a little bit of weed, but there we go.
Quite possibly. Actually, puppets is one thing that they used to lean on quite heavily in television. When you think about children's TV like Andy Pandy and Bill and Ben and even things like sort of Stingray and Thunderbirds, but they don't really use them so much anymore.
No, they don't. And I actually, my very favourite programme when I was about 5 was Thunderbirds. And I was so enthralled by Thunderbirds. It was such a great programme. I thought I was Scott Tracy for quite a long time. People had to call me Scott, and my mum even made me, I don't know whether you could buy a little outfit, but she certainly made me a Scott Tracy outfit. I remember my grandfather used to smoke cigars, and he had those cigar canisters, those little metal things, and she put them together and made a sort of the thing on the sash that Scott Tracy has. It was very, very clever. Captain Scarlet was a bit scary. So I didn't watch that, but Thunderbirds I loved. I loved that blue, all their lovely sky blue uniforms. And then those brilliant sequences where very slowly, and this is something else that you don't get now because our cutting has got faster and faster and faster. Very slowly you would just see, Thunderbird 2 being there, and then the bit would go up and then the ramp would go up like that, or the palm trees would go down. But it was all done very slowly, and it was great because it was repeated over and over again, which is somehow very comforting and very necessary for children to have a lot of repetition, I've later learned. But I actually ended up doing my dissertation at university on Thunderbirds and puppets on TV.
Really? I had no idea. So you're a specialist in this area. Do you remember any of your learnings from that? Do you remember anything? What were your key takeaways from puppets on TV and Thunderbirds?
Well, much like you're saying, really, that actually in those early days of TV, things like Muffin the Mule, and it was a really great way of introducing characters to children that weren't human and cheap, obviously, because you've just got some puppets. You don't have to pay the puppets. But then Jerry Anderson obviously made it incredibly sophisticated, although he was using models and puppets still. But it was a complete sort of transformation of that genre. And then he even came up with this incredible way of making the puppets' mouths move called super marionation. And there was a sort of electronic solenoid thing in the mouth, which corresponded to the microphone that the actor was speaking into. I mean, it's just incredible to think that back then, that's what he thought of out of the blue.
My son is obsessed with Thunderbirds at the moment, the more recent CGI version, but we have gone back and watched some of the older ones. And when I see super marionation, I always thought that was just a fancy word for them using puppets to tell the stories, but that was an actual process, an actual facet of the production that he'd invented, was it?
Yeah, completely invented by him. And then, of course, all the use of models, those brilliant sets with, like the Hood's lair and even the living room at the Tracy's mansion. I mean, they were all beautifully built and modelled. And I think a lot of visual effects designers nowadays took inspiration from those models and those sets that just stunningly made all those things.
Well, that's amazing. I had no idea you were an academic in this area as well as being a long-term practitioner. So obviously you eventually moved into the world of acting. How did you find yourself in the world of kids television?
The first thing I did was I had this amazing year in 1987 when not only did I get the part as Ace, who became the companion in Doctor Who, but around that time, and I was looking through some old papers the other day, and I found my letter from the BBC contracts department saying, can you come for an audition? And I loved children's TV. I haven't talked about Big Omission here. I haven't talked about Blue Peter, which I watched avidly growing up. I always wanted to be a Blue Peter presenter. I was in the kind of glory days of Val, John and Pete and Petra and Patch and all that. I've still got my collection of Blue Peter annuals. So when I went to university, did my dissertation on puppets and so on, and I hadn't lost this dream of wanting to present. I also loved making things as well when I was a child. So I would, make things out of squeezy bottles and sellotape, except of course you had to call them washing up liquid bottles and sticky tape and sticky back plastic. And I loved sort of talking to myself while making things as well. It was great training I gave myself. Anyway, then I'd done lots of children's theatre out of the back of vans. I'd done the working men's clubs to get my equity card, singing, and eventually I was very good at sort of like sending off letters and things. And I thought, well, may as well send off some letters to the BBC. So I did. And somebody in the contracts department obviously picked up my CV and and I'd done a lot of children's theatre at this point, a lot of singing. And they said, would you like to come for this general audition for children's TV? So I was in my element and I went down there to the North Acton rehearsal rooms and I did an audition in front of a panel of about 5 people. It was Anne Goby, Alison Stewart, but sort of like these luminaries of BBC children's TV. I had to do a little piece, do a bit with a puppet, sing a song, which was completely like falling off a log for me, and then do a make. I'd been rehearsing for it all my life, I think. And then a little while later, I got a letter saying, "Oh, could you come and audition for this? We liked what you did. Could you come and audition for this program called Corners?" So I went in and saw Alison Stewart, who was the producer for that. Got on very well with her. Again, did a little piece, worked with the puppet called Joe, this sort of lump of rubber, and did a song, did a make, and got the part, as it were. And that was my first telly. But I was also doing Doctor Who. So I did a Doctor Who in August. We filmed my first Doctor Who. And then in September, I started doing Corners. And my very first outside broadcast, I remember it really well. We filmed me going to meet the composer, Kev McCulloch, of the new Doctor Who theme. And he showed me on his synthesizer. We did a bit about synthesizers. And it was this strange, funny world. And then I did nothing but Doctor Who Corners for the next 3 years, solidly at the BBC. And I don't know, I've never met anyone who's had that training where you're either acting at the BBC or presenting. And it was extraordinary. And then I went on to do Words and Pictures for BBC Schools. I did, I think, about 5 series of that. Absolutely loved doing that. We won the Japan prize, I think, for something or other, whatever that is. And everything else, like Rainbow, and I appeared on Blue Peter, but to my great relief, but I didn't present. And then I did a Saturday morning TV show. So all of that came from this initial stint on Corners, really, where I really learnt my presenting skills. I was writing quite a lot of the links as well, and working with Simon, who wrote a lot as well. And then I did Melvin and Maureen's musicograms as well. Gosh, it's all coming back to me.
I remember a little bit about Corners when I was younger, and I remember, there was a puppet, and there was teaching kids different things. Explain a bit about the program. What was its genesis? What it did? What it was aiming to do with kids?
Well, it was a lovely program because what it was, children could write in questions. You know how children want to know? They're curious. They say, "Why is this? Why is the sky blue? Why do why do birds fly south in the summer? Why do this? How do you get the jam into donuts? How do sticks of rock have writing down the middle?" And the programme aimed to answer those in as many entertaining and different ways as possible. So, and Corners, it was called because we had a mystery corner, which was things like, I remember this machine appeared one day in the mystery corner, and it was indeed a thing which may put the jam into donuts. It was a special machine, and then there was Joe's corner, and Joe was this lump of latex who told terrible jokes and would also answer questions as well. And then we'd have I can't remember what the other 2 corners were called, but they were corners. And we'd answer all sorts of questions. We'd read out the letters. We've had a letter from so-and-so and so-and-so. And the things that we did were brilliant. I mean, I brought my motorbike in one day. We had a look at that. We did sketches and songs as well, which was brilliant because I loved the combination of using my kind of character acting skills and presenting as well. So we did a song about the history of bicycles. Simon Davis was a really good songwriter as well, so he'd write the songs. We did a song about special effects where we went out on location, and we did a sort of, Simon and I were, that was when Steve Johnson, who then later went on to Motormouth, and he and I dressed up in overalls and did this whole thing about a snow machine and a wind machine, and they were great. I can still remember the tunes as well. It's incredible.
When you were making it, were you was everything purely driven by the questions? Were you thinking about what what educational sort of points you had to hit, or was it a bit more free flowing than that? I'm just interested in how the behind the scenes process worked and how it all came together, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the overarching context was education and fun, fun with education. But really, it came from the children's questions, definitely. And Ali was absolutely brilliant at pulling all that together. And we had such fun doing it as well. I think that comes across as well. And I think that's one of the keys in all of the children's TV I've been involved in, is that I've always had fun doing it. And the teams have been amazing because everybody has this passion for children's TV, especially at the BBC, where there were a lot of sort of ex-teachers or people who'd been in education, but they realised the need for fun and sort of different ideas and presenting things a bit differently, and also the kind of range of things that you do within a programme, the kind of the rhythm of a programme that needs to be engaging all the time, because it's very easy for kids to turn away, turn off, so make them laugh.
One of the reasons why I sort of wanted to start this podcast is I wanted to, I think children's TV is interesting from that fact that it's fun, it's bright, it's colourful, but people do put thought behind it and really try their hardest to make it as good as they can be, creatively, educationally, but it only really works if it's fun and it's engaging for the kids. So that's why I find it such a fascinating sort of medium, really.
It's got to hold a child's attention, and children are very good critics. They won't be polite. They won't sit there through something and think, oh, I'll give it another episode or two before I make a decision. No, it's like, do I like that? Yes, I'll carry on watching. Do I like that? No, bye. It's not a question either of grabbing them by sensationalism. It's like, but you're right, that the thought behind children's programming is impeccable. It's like, It's like a really good teacher. It's the similar sort of thing to a lesson plan. It's like it's got to be engaging and it's got to be educational, if you like. We all know that, children are the best critics.
No, absolutely, and it's why I think when a children's program sort of really cuts through and becomes popular with kids and adults start talking about it as well, you can just see the craft behind it and see how well some of these programs are put together. Like since I've had kids, big programs are big things like Bluey and Hey Dougie and things like that people have really sort of, it's gone beyond the kids loving it, and the adults have talked about it as well. And so it's just mind-boggling the amount of work that goes in and the people putting in such hard work to make it as good as it can be.
I remember I worked with Jonathan Cohen, who was one of the luminaries on Play School and Play Away. And I worked with him on Melvin and Maureen's musicograms and on other things as well, because there was always like a group of people, because it was the East Tower at BBC TV Centre was the kind of mecca of BBC's children's TV. And their people, well, Biddy Baxter obviously was probably the queen of the East Tower, but there were people like Anne Wood and Anne Goby and Ali Stewart, and people worked their way up through as well. So Kay Benbow, for example, who they later became head of CBeebies. Kay, she did her first stuff with me on a programme called Melvin and Maureen's musicograms. You're absolutely right. It's always a team effort. Everybody joins in and everybody is dedicated to making the best programme they possibly can. So we'd have rehearsals, and in the rehearsal room there'd be, say, Ali, me, Kay, Matthew Devitt, who played Melvin, me, and our floor assistant as well was often there doing props and stuff like that. And what I can remember from that is this I mean, it was a brilliant, bonkers show, Melvin and Maureens. It's really wonderful. I'm glad that some of it's on YouTube. It was, everybody loved it. So we went in for the first read-through, and the costume designer, who ended up winning an Oscar actually in the end, not for Melvin and Maureens, but for, she was so, you know, she said, I see Maureen as this kind of, you know, polka dots with this and that and that. So everyone had got their own, you know, everyone was working towards making it the best program possible. And the costume and makeup people were amazing. And I mean, the stuff I got to wear on that, and the hairdos I had, and but children are like that as well. Young children want to wear the most outrageous clothes. And, you know, as a parent, I don't know whether you've had this, but you look at your child and you go, you can't go out like that. You know, I remember my son, when he was about 3, we all went out with a little group of people, 3 or 4. We walked down to the local shopping centre, and he absolutely refused to take his Snow White princess dress off, you know, and put some, you know, so children love this sort of outrageousness, and they're very camp in their taste. And yeah, Melvin and Maureens was the sort of campest preschool program you've ever seen.
So explain a bit more about what the program was and how it started and what the central ideas were.
Melvin and Maureens was based on a sort of, kissogram idea, I suppose, a musicogram. Melvin and Maureen are they're friends. I think they're, you know, or brother and sister maybe. You don't quite know. They bicker a lot, and they have this shop really cool where they dispense musicograms to anybody who needs them. So people come into the shop and they say, like, for example, we had Super Duper Man, and he came in and he was a bit jaded and cynical about his music, you know, this heroic music, and he wanted something a bit different. So the conceit was that we could go through all these different styles of music and dance, actually. We also had a brilliant choreographer. And he ended up with a sort of soft shoe shuffle. Or there was one day where it was the goldfish's birthday, and they wanted to have somebody wanted a musicogram for their goldfish, I think. And we ended up doing this crazy routine dressed as sort of Busby Berkeley goldfish, me and Matthew, with sort of high kicks and things like that. But along the way, it was really it was to show children, to get them enthused about music of all kinds, all genres. So we'd show instruments. Matthew could play any instrument. He's one of these annoying people who could just pick something up and play. We'd have Jonathan Cohen and friends, Will on drums, in the studio sometimes playing. And it was just a sort of, well, as the title say, a musical extravaganza. And it really was. And we filmed it all at the BBC in a studio there. And we used bits of the studio as well, because it was a tiny budget. But it was kind of like industrial, because that's what the studio looked like. Oh, it was amazing. It was so inventive. We had this cupboard which you'd go to every episode, and there was Groovy Ted in there, who was a teddy bear. And Groovy Ted and his kind of Mr. Spoons on the drums, and they'd again be doing some aspect of music. So it was a wonderful program. I think it's high time it came back.
And what was the process for rehearsing and planning and shooting an episode like that? How long would you spend, trying everything out? And were you shooting more than one in one day, or was it one day an episode?
Yeah, I mean, it was, when I think about it, well, we were very lucky that we did have rehearsals, because you don't really do that anymore. But we'd go over to North Acton to the rehearsal rooms. We'd have a script that we kept to, and we would rehearse, I can't remember how many days, maybe a couple of days for each episode. I think we'd do a little studio block, as far as I can remember. So we'd do, say, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. as far as I can remember. We'd be learning the songs. I mean, I loved it because in the end, Jonathan was writing songs and stuff for us. And we did, and Simon again, who I'd been on corners with, he was writing the scripts. So it's all in the family, you know. There was one where we did some opera. Gosh, we did an opera, which reminds me actually, gosh, yes, in Words and Pictures, I was working with Sheila. She was producing and she was really into music and she realised I could sing. And so we decided to have one whole episode based around the story of the Emperor and the Nightingale, but we did it as an operetta. And she'd been to university with Howard Goodall, who famously wrote the credits for Blackadder and Vicar of Dibley, and also, I mean, amazing. I mean, that's his kind of lighter stuff. He's an amazing composer in his own right. So she arranged to meet him at the Wigmore Hall with me in London, which is one of the most prestigious concert venues, classical concert venues in the UK. And we rehearsed on the stage at the Wigmore Hall, me and Howard Goodall and the guy who was playing the Emperor, this operetta. I'd completely forgotten that. Gosh, that's one of the highlights, I think, of my life.
Amazing. And Words and Pictures was far more an educational program, wasn't it? It was where I seem to remember watching it on the television, being ill while at school. And it was to teach children to read and write. Tell me a bit about Words and Pictures.
Yes, Words and Pictures was very much a BBC education program. It wasn't entertainment, but very similar in its ethos, which was to educate while entertaining. And there were some things that happened every episode. You could guarantee the same structure. Again, repetition being so important to children, and sort of that kind of safety, and then looking forward to, you know, the sort of the gratification of having Magic Pencil would come every...
Magic Pencil, I remember that. I found it slightly eerie in a way. It was a pencil that sort of floated through the air and drew out the letter that you were concentrating on, and drew it several times, and a light would come on at the end when it was sort of pressing down on the paper. But sort of probably using old blue chroma key technology to make the operator disappear. But yeah, something slightly eerie about it, I remember.
Yes, you're right. It was basically somebody with a long glove on their arm holding this pencil thing that had a little lever on the side so that they could hold on, and then doing that. And then I would come on, and I would come later in a later session and do a whole load of Magic Pencils all day. And Paddy Kingsland's studio in Hammersmith going, watch how Magic Pencil writes it. And then up, down, round, and flick. They used to say kick before in many years ago, but they thought that was a bit too violent, so they turned that into flick. But there was sort of, you know, up and down, or round and round. And I do it to picture, obviously. And you needed a good sense of rhythm because he had to sort of do it for the children. But yeah, very, very great to have Magic Pencil. And so many people come up to me and say, oh, you helped me learn to read and write. There was one series we did, which was, made by executive producer Sarah. Again, can't remember her surname, but we went to Jersey to film the whole thing. We had a little, actually, we did have a little stuff in studio as well, but most of it was on location in Jersey. And the idea was that I lived in a lighthouse, which was, I think it was Corbière actually. And we went into the lighthouse to do one day. That was a brilliant series. We did lots of stuff on the beach, and I remember flying a plane and milking a cow. And surfing, and just unbelievable. The privilege of being a children's TV presenter and learning, going and seeing things that people would not normally see, and going to look at factories where people make things, and just extraordinary. And then what was really I loved about that, and I wish I'd asked for it afterwards, but the opening titles, they did it. They did a little animation with a little sort of plasticine, like morph of me, and I had this theme tune that went, "Hello there, my name's Sophie. I live in the lighthouse by the sea," etc., etc. So, and this little figure of me walks out of the lighthouse. I think, oh no, I wish I'd asked for that.
Wow. Yeah, another example of people, they didn't have to make that intro out of claymation, but they did. They put the time and effort into making it really beautiful, I imagine, and put a lot of craft into it.
There was such care taken over words and pictures. There was another one where I had a kitchen with a magic fridge, just the number of hours that went into the thought behind it and the design, and also to sort of really the concern for teachers as well. The understanding that it's not the easiest job in the world, teaching young children to read and write, and to really give them this. I mean, teachers have said to me, it was like a nice little break for them, because they could wheel out the TV. Remember that? It wheeled out the TV, and everybody would sit quietly in front of it. Then they could use it as a launching point for their lessons. So it was very much done in collaboration with schools, and there were booklets for teachers and things produced as well. And we were very much, it felt like we were working with education and with teachers.
Fantastic. And so that's covering some of the amazing things you did in the more sort of live action era of your career in some ways, in terms of children's, but sort of from what I can tell, in the more sort of second half, you've done a much more voice work, much more sort of voiceovers for animation, that kind of thing. I think starting was one of the first things you did, Bob the Builder?
One of the very early things I did, because you can kind of see, you can tell when I had my children, which is where I stopped doing so much live action and went into voice work. So I did. I'd done a lot of the animation on words and pictures. Obviously, I was voicing over stories and things. But then I think one of the very first things I did, and I'd already been doing a lot of English language tapes, which I still do, for various countries around the world, learning English as a foreign language. But one of the first things I did was a series called The Magic Key Adventures. And that was when I was pregnant with my first son. And it was incredible. Again, they were very, very family friendly. I said, well, look, I'm pregnant. What happens if I have the baby? Because I was quite pronounced. And they said, well, don't worry, because we're having a break. And then you can come back and bring the baby with you. They provided for me, the production company. There was a wonderful PA. And she came and sat with the baby or took him out for a walk in the pram. And then whenever I needed to feed him, I could tell because there was a tingling. And I'd go downstairs and give him a feed and then go carry on back working. It's just been the most amazing. The world of voiceovers has been so accepting and wonderful about having children and babies, and very understanding. It was amazing that. But I played Biff and I think Chip in that, 2 parts I had in that, and a really lovely group of actors I was working with there.
Magic Key was an animated version of the Biff, Chip and Kipper books, which are familiar to many parents who've had them through their schools, learning to read. Do you remember working with other people on that who you're working with and the other voices?
Yes, although I can't remember their names, but I can see them bright as day. I don't know, I think it's the menopause probably, but I can't remember offhand. But yes, there was, Richard, who was playing the dog, and Emma, who was playing Kipper. And I think I met Dave Peacock, who was our director, engineer on that. And then I did a lot of work with him. I was in Noddy, Noddy played by Teresa Gallagher, and then I was playing a character who doesn't really appear in the books, but I was playing this little fairy called Lindy, I think, who was a mechanic. I think they needed a sort of, tough girl in Noddy. So
yes, I can imagine some of it needed a bit updating compared to the original books. So I imagine so. Okay, so I spoke to Kate Harbour recently, and she obviously did Bob the Builder. So and that was something you worked on. And do you remember those sessions? Do you remember getting together with the rest of the team there? Because she had very fond memories of work on it too.
Yes, well, I did the US version, which is slightly bizarre, with Dirk Maggs, who's amazing. I mean, he's a luminary director, producer, kind of creative, amazing man. But I was doing it on my own by then, because we were, as you probably know, there are certain ways of doing animation. The most satisfying and lovely way of doing it is the way that we did the Oxford Reading Tree, and we did Noddy, and we did Tree Food Tom and Dennis the Menace, which is where you're all together in the studio and you're kind of working as an ensemble. And a lot of the time they're animating then to what you're creating. Then there's a lot of it that's the other way around, which is where you're voicing to what's already been recorded. So, for example, things like Bananas in Pyjamas and Bob the Builder and Peter Rabbit. That's how I did that. So it would be, yes, you just go in on your own, and it's not so satisfying. It's much quicker because you're just getting your bits to do. Piku and Tuki I did recently. That was interesting because that was dubbing the Hindi. So it was wonderful to hear the Hindi voices and then to be doing the English for that, and matching. A lot of the time you're trying to match your mouth movements to what they're saying. Oh, another brilliant one that I can't pass over is doing number time for BBC schools. And apparently that was quite one of the early ones I did that went on for a long time. Apparently word went round saying, I'm looking for somebody who could do a baby Mexican gerbil voice for number time. And apparently the producer told me they just got emails saying, try Sophie Aldred. So I don't know why, but I obviously was their chosen baby Mexican gerbil. And that was with Steve Steen and Blue Peter presenter Janet Ellis. That was lovely.
As well as baby Mexican hamsters, probably your biggest specialism, apart from that in some ways, is doing young boys. So Tree Food Tom and Dennis the Menace. Is there a reason that came about, or just by accident? How did you get to be doing these sort of young male characters?
I think it's one of those things, because again, Biff and or Chip is a boy, aren't they? I can't remember. But I have always been able to do, I think I've got a low voice, and I can do girl voices as well, but somehow, maybe because I've got two boys as well, and watched them growing up. In fact, when we went in for Tree Food Tom, I went and did a test for it and then got the part and went in and we had the pictures that the animators had kind of conceived on the wall. And I said, oh, he looks like a bit like my eldest son. And so that's what I immediately thought of. And I was kind of thinking of his voice when I was doing Tree Food Tom. And then the funny thing was that the producer, Dan Bays, said, and guy who thought up the whole thing anyway, brilliant guy. He said, we're looking for a real boy who can be in the credits and the titles. And and do you think he'd be interested in auditioning? I said, oh, I don't know. So I went home and I said to Adam, the audition will be at TV Centre, which is a historic building, and he was into history at the time. It's possibly your only chance to go to the TV Centre. So he said, all right, I'll go along. And he went with my husband so that people wouldn't accuse him of nepotism, and that it wouldn't seem like he got the job because of who he was. And he got the job on his own merit. So
oh, fantastic! So that's your son in the opening credits as well.
Yes. So now he'll be 24 in a couple of weeks' time, and I imagine that quite a lot of his friends will be posting him, aged whatever he was, 9 or 10, on doing his cool tree food Tom move.
Oh my goodness! Well, that's a spectacular thing to being able to do, and I had no idea that was him as well.
He can still do the move that he did on, even though he's 6'2", and
oh, amazing. And how did you? I mean, you mentioned that a bit there. You saw an image of the character, and that helped you sort of form the voice. I mean, obviously, with something like Tree Food Tom, that's probably a bit more prescriptive because you can see a child at a certain age, but when the character's a bit more, as you say, a Mexican baby hamster, how do you go about finding the voice for them, and what's your process there?
I just don't know. It just comes to me. And sometimes my husband will say, what does that animal sound like? And he'll point to something and I'll just do a voice. And it all came from, when I was very young, and my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, we used to play this game with our dolls and teddies and things. And we used to put them in their cots and their beds, and we used to point to a map on the wall and pretend that we were going to this place, and we'd have an adventure. And all the toys would have characters and different voices. I mean, I can remember to this day, I had a big Tiny Tears, and she, for some reason, was always the kind of bossy, oh, she spoke like this, she was a bit of a pain, actually. And then there was my brother's Teddy, called Teddy Popscrew for some reason, and he was always the hero, so he'd sound like that. And then all these various toys would have different attributes and characteristics, and we could both do the voices. There wasn't any you do that voice and I'll do that voice. It was just sort of unspoken. So I think we both kind of developed this facility for being able to do funny voices. And also on the radio Radio 4 was off and on in our house, so we were listening to things like Just a Minute, with Kenneth Williams and that extraordinary voice, and Derek Nimmo, Clement Freud, all those comedians who had the very distinctive voices. So I think they all just went in there somewhere as well.
Amazing. It's clear that your childhood really was setting you up for the sort of life that you have led by the sounds of things, being obsessed with children's TV and making funny voices for your teddies, and you just seem to have lived the life that you were destined to live. It seems incredible. I
don't know whether any of your listeners had this experience though, because I remember my parents wouldn't mind me watching the BBC, and not for long either, because for the younger listeners, I mean, it was extraordinary to think, wasn't it, that there were, 2 channels initially, and they would stop at a certain time, and children's TV would be this prescriptive time, and you couldn't see it again ever. So if you missed it, that was it. So you had to sit down. I was very much allowed to watch Blue Peter. When Magpie came on ITV, that was slightly frowned on because, it was a bit hip and trendy, and it was, people didn't quite trust Magpie in the way they trusted the BBC. And then Saturday mornings, my parents, my mum didn't want me to watch cartoons, so things like Scooby-Doo and American cartoons and Dick Dastardly and Muttley, but we'd imitate them. We'd go around trying to do the voices and Stop the Pigeon, Hong Kong Phooey, Rhubarb and Custard. I remember I talked about Bob Godfrey earlier. Rhubarb and Custard, my mum said, "Oh, this is giving me a headache," and she would, because it wobbled. But I loved it. And then Saturday mornings, I'd sneak in and I'd try and watch the Banana Splits, which were the sort of bizarre American kind of actors in skins. There was a dog and there was a funny characters and this great theme tune. La 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 la. And there was I think it was because it was so long as well. You could watch it for an hour and a half or something like that. That it was a waste of time. And get out there and do something and go and get some fresh air. Those typical things we parents say.
Yes. No, we do say things like that, but also it's quite handy to have something that the kids can just settle down in, like the teachers putting their kids in front of words and pictures for a little bit of time. Sometimes it's just incredibly helpful to have something that they can watch, get entertained by, and also get inspired by. And I think the best stuff does inspire kids to ask questions, to use their imagination. I've certainly found that with my children. It's the good stuff is the stuff that goes beyond the screen and you can chat about and talk about. And whether it's my son and talking about different sea creatures with octonauts, or now, as I said, Thunderbirds, and talking about the way that works. And yesterday on a map, we were trying to work out where Tracy Island might be in the middle of the South Pacific and start to talk about, that area. So the best stuff always comes off the screen and helps as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for talking me through everything, because it's been incredibly thorough, and I've just got a sense of a really amazing career you have, and you're obviously still doing and still involved in. So it's been amazing, and you obviously lived and breathed kids TV so much, and even to the point of writing a dissertation on it. So I'm so glad to have chatted to you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Corinne. It's been great to try and remember all those things.
No worries, anytime. So thank you so much, Sophie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Corinne.
So a big thanks to Sophie for chatting to me. It was really great to speak to her. So this is the first edition of this podcast. I have to tell you to please remember, if you can, like and subscribe the show, as I have more editions to put out, and I really hope to do more of these. Thank you very much.